Today we are going to discuss what is spiritual happiness as discussed by the Buddha, as defined by the Buddha. And the Buddha's definition of spiritual happiness is quite different from our own definition of spiritual happiness. And in this discussion tonight, you will find out exactly what the Buddha meant when he said spiritual happiness. What is worldly happiness? What is spiritual happiness? And what is happiness that is even higher than spiritual happiness? Okay, this is actually based on a sutta. I think we have touched on worldly happiness last year, if I remember correctly. Okay, so this slide is actually a summary of what we have discussed last year on worldly happiness. As these are the results that are being presented by scientists. Scientists who have done experiments and research on happiness, worldly happiness. Okay. Basically, what they have found is that for worldly happiness, 50% of our happiness comes from our genes, something that is already within us when we were born into this world. Okay. Now, this is how the scientists view it. Okay. I view it as a Buddhist a little bit differently. My impression of this is that yes, when we are born, we carry with us certain genes that tend to set us on a certain kind of attributes of behavior. But the genes itself is actually a reflection or a representation of our karmic imprint, which is the spiritual genes. That's how I see it. Okay. Of course, I won't say this in any scientific conference. There's no way to back it up. I just get fired. Right. But the way I see it is that each of us carry with us karmic imprints. Right? And this karmic imprint actually is what determines where we go to, which parents that we are going to go to, because of the similar characteristics that we carry in our karmic imprint. And when the fertilization occurs and we go in to occupy it, it is not by accident, but because we have some resonance, some familiarity and similarity with whatever is already there. Otherwise, it won't fit, or it won't fit very well. Okay. So the karmic imprint is actually the greater determinant of the physical gene, which is the physical imprint that we get. My opinion, not scientific opinion, not the Buddha's opinion. This is how I see it. Anyway, that's 50%. That's quite a big chunk. And if it is imprinted like this, actually, if it comes through the genes, it's a little bit harder to change. A little bit harder to change does not necessarily mean cannot change. It just means the imprint is stronger. If you want to change, you have to put in more effort. It's like writing on the rock, not writing on the sand. Okay, definitely not writing on the water, because you write on water, there's no leftover imprints. Okay, that's the kind of mind, in fact, the Buddha encouraged. Our mind should be one that is like writing on the water, no residual imprint after that. 40% of our happiness is dependent on our internal thoughts. This is the important part. This is the part where if we can consciously manage our thoughts, then we can determine our level of happiness in the worldly sense. Okay. And only 10% come from external factors, external circumstances, as in where you are born, whether you are born into a rich family or a poor family, whether you are born into a country with lots of natural disasters, war, or full of natural resources for you. The external factors only form about 10% or determines about 10% of that happiness. 40%, a big chunk of this happiness is in our mind, in the way we think. Okay, and they also found out that yes, we need money to be happy, but that depends on your level of comfort. It's basically a sense of security. If your sense of security requires you to have a lot of money to feel secure, then you will require a lot of money in order for you to have that level of happiness. But generally, they found out that in America, the average person who has an income of about 70,000 USD per year is already enough for them to feel relatively secure and happy. Anything above, after that, doesn't add on very much happiness. Okay, so if you have 70,000 USD in a year, you can consider yourself to be generally quite secure and happy. Okay, because the economy is quite predictable, there's no major earthquake or whatever. So generally, anybody who's earning $70,000 a year, they have a relatively good house, good car, can send children off to education. They don't need a lot, and they're generally happy. Anything additional after that doesn't add on significantly to that level of happiness. Okay. And then they also found that yes, if you have a healthy body, you are generally happier. Okay, so healthy body is important for happiness. But they also found that since our healthy body is very much dependent on our healthy mind, our mind is actually the first defense for our body. So if you can have a healthy mind, you will automatically have a healthier body and therefore happier. Okay. Number 3, with regards to relationships, if you think that you need people or you need somebody else beside yourself to be happy, then they are saying, no, that's not true. The only person you need to be happy with is yourself. If you are contented with yourself, you are happy. If you are not contented with yourself, no matter who you have around you, it does not necessarily mean you will be happy. Okay? Because when I was younger, I thought, I grow up, I get a good wife, I'll be happy. Now that I'm older, I know that's not true. I think the reverse is the same. What I'm trying to say is that your happiness is not dependent on somebody else, on yourself. Okay? Right. With regards to meaning of life, some people have the impression that in order for them to find their life to be meaningful, they got to have big achievement. Movie stars, celebrities, Prime Minister of Malaysia, that kind of thing.
Oh.
But it's not necessarily true, and it's even not necessary. Okay, the little things in life that we do on a day-to-day basis is a big source of our happiness, or lack of it. So the daily things we do in life, with our family, with our children, with our parents, with our friends, with the people in our community, that kind of activities, we can derive a lot of happiness from it. Okay, it doesn't need to be a big thing, big project. And then lastly, does spirituality give you happiness? The answer is yes. Because spirituality in most cases requires that we live a virtuous life, a morally upright life. Okay, and those who live a morally upright life tends to be happier. Okay, so it can be any religion: Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism. Because all these major religions talk about living an upright, morally good kind of life. And those who practice accordingly in this way, they are free from remorse, free from guilt. The two basic pillars, right? If you are free from remorse, free from guilt, in fact, if you remember the sutta that we discussed on the benefits of virtues last year, if you are free from remorse and free from guilt, that is the first step to further happiness. Okay, that is the most basic step before you go on to other happiness. So if you live a morally upright life, a spiritual life, then you are generally happier. Okay. But this is worldly happiness. The Buddha says, well, there is worldly happiness, but there is also spiritual happiness. And in fact, there is another happiness that is even higher than spiritual happiness. And this is found in Niramisa Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya 36.31. And this is what we are going to discuss tonight. The other one was just an intro. And of course, of all the happiness, the highest happiness is Nibbana. Nibbanang Paramang Sukham. Nibbana, Paramang is ultimate or highest. Sukham is happiness. So Nibbanang Paramang Sukham. Let's take a look at each one of them. This is the sutta. I have tabulated it to make it easier for you to see. Basically, in this sutta, the Buddha talked to his monks and he said, Bhikkhus, there is worldly rapture or worldly pity or worldly joy. There is spiritual joy. There is also joy that is higher than the spiritual. There is also worldly happiness. There is also spiritual happiness. And there is happiness that is higher than spiritual happiness. Likewise, there is worldly equanimity. There is spiritual equanimity. And there is also equanimity that is higher than spiritual equanimity. There is also worldly deliverance, spiritual deliverance, and deliverance that is higher than spiritual. So that's what he said. And then he defined what is worldly joy. Worldly joy, worldly happiness, and worldly equanimities all arise in dependence on the 5 chords of sensual pleasures. So in other words, worldly happiness is happiness that you derive by interacting with the external world, with your 5 physical senses. When you see something pleasant, that gives rise to happiness. If you hear a nice sound, that also gives rise to happiness. If you like some nice smell, nice taste, nice touch, all this give you worldly happiness. Okay. On the other hand, very specific spiritual joy, spiritual happiness, and spiritual equanimity are all dependent on the attainment of jhanas. This is a very fixed or very clear definition from the Buddha when it comes to spiritual happiness. So anything that is spiritual, whether spiritual joy, spiritual happiness, or spiritual equanimity, they all arise from the attainment of jhanas. When you attain the first and the second jhanas, you are in rapture, piti. When you can get into the third jhana, then you get happiness, spiritual happiness. And by the time you get into the 4th jhanas, where your mind is completely one-pointed and equanimous, perfected the equanimity and mindfulness, then that is spiritual equanimity. On the other hand, there is even another higher level of happiness, higher than spiritual. And that is when the taints are destroyed. That is enlightenment, the destructions of the asavas. Okay. So the highest happiness that is even higher than spiritual happiness, is liberation from asavas, attainment of nibbana, enlightenment. Okay. Now if you look at deliverance, you'll find that in order for you to be delivered from worldly happiness, you have to rise up to the Rupa Loka. Not the Kama Loka, not even the first few levels of heaven, but Rupa Loka. This is where you, in order to go there, to the Brahma world, you already need to attain the jhanas. Okay, so to be delivered or to escape from worldly happiness, to get into spiritual happiness, you need to attain the Rupa Loka. Okay. In order to escape from spiritual happiness, here it says you need a Rupa Loka, which is the 5th jhanas and above, where it is based on infinite space, infinite consciousness, nothingness, and neither perception or non-perception, which a bit harder to understand. But basically, you know that the Buddha's standard or definition for spiritual happiness is very high. In the past, I used to think that when I practice mindfulness and I manage my thinking and I focus well and I reduce all negative thoughts and I focus on all these positive thoughts, so I'm doing right effort, right mindfulness. And I, even by just doing these two, I'm already deriving a lot of happiness. And I thought, okay, this is really spiritual happiness, very nice. But when I reached this sutta, I realized that is not the Buddha standard. The Buddha standard for spiritual happiness is the attainment of jhana. Okay. Now, why is worldly happiness not so desirable compared to spiritual happiness? Okay, we know that it is outward focused and dependent on the 5 physical senses. Therefore, any kind of happiness is dependent on external factors, not within our own control. And they are transient, they don't last very long. And I think we mentioned this before, it's a bottomless pit. The Buddha described worldly sensual pleasures as a bottomless pit, a bottomless hole, where he says when you fall into it, there is no foothold for you to hang on to. You just keep falling and falling and falling and falling, and there's no end to it. And through our own experience with the external world, we find that this is true. We look at something beautiful, and after some time it is no longer beautiful. We are looking for something even more beautiful. Likewise, when we look for something nice to eat, tasty, good, when we eat it, it tastes really good. We thought that's the best already. But after some time, it is no longer the best, and we continue to look for something even better. And it continues like that. Our requirement, our standard for it continues to rise. And we can never actually be satisfied in the worldly sense. So it is a bottomless pit. And it is undesirable because it leads to increase in unwholesome states. You get more greedy. And when you don't get it, you get upset, hatred, ill will arise. And it just continues to validate and confirms your delusion about the external world, about the self. Okay. In fact, the Buddha in the Magandiya Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 75, compare worldly happiness with a leper. You know, a leper, a leper is a person who has a lot of skin sores. And he says, the leper, when he has a lot of sores, itchy and painful, what does he do? He scratch. But even after scratching a lot, he doesn't get satisfied with it. So what else does he do? He burn. He take hot charcoal or hot iron and he burn his own wound. And for a moment he feels very good, relief from the itchiness. Okay. Then he says, suppose now this leper met a doctor and the doctor miraculously cured him completely and his skin becomes perfect. Now if you drag him to somebody who is holding a hot iron to burn his skin, do you think he will like it? No. Why? Because now his skin is okay. He knows this is not pleasurable, this is painful. The Buddha says we are like that. We interact with the external stimuli and we think, oh, this is happiness, this is fantastic. But when we are awakened, okay, we start to realize that, hey, those were the sores, and the pleasures that I thought was pleasurable was the hot charcoal and iron rod that I have inflicted on myself. In reality, it's painful. Only because I was sick, I couldn't see it. Now that I'm awake, then I see it. That's how the Buddha compared our worldly happiness. So because we are not able to see it clearly, things as they really are. That's why we see all the external things as painful and as pleasurable and desirable. Right? The other simile that the Buddha used is the deer and the hunter. Says, when the deer comes out of the jungle or come out of the hiding into the fringe of the jungle, the hunter will be very easy for the hunter to hunt the deer, right? Okay. In order for the deer to escape the hunter, the deer needs to go deeper and deeper into the jungle. Because why? The jungle is the deer's domain, not the hunter's domain. So the further he goes into the deep jungle, the harder it is for the hunter to get the deer. In the same way, in our practice, when we are able to go inward into our mind, and especially when we have overcome the 5 hindrances and established ourselves in jhana, Mara can never reach us, can never touch us, because we are now in our own domain. Previously, we were in Mara's domain. But once we get into this jhana state, we are in our own domain. Mara cannot reach us, cannot touch us. We are safe. So, that's why the Buddha says, spiritual happiness, you only get it in the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana. Let's take a quick look at the jhanas. I think we have covered this before in the past. Basically, in the sutta, Samma Samadhi Sutta, Samyutta Nikaya number 45.8 on right concentration, the Buddha described the first jhana as such. In order for you to attain the first jhana, you withdraw from sensuality. That means you seclude yourself from the external world. Okay. Withdraw from unskillful mental qualities. These unskillful mental qualities here normally refers to the 5 hindrances. So what happens is, you go into your retreat, you find a quiet place, free of disturbances, you sit down, and you put your focus in front of you, or you bring your attention forward. Okay, close your eyes. When you close your eyes, when you are in a place where it is quiet, you are closing off most of the 5 physical senses already from the external world. Then when you focus inward, your mind is going into your mental world. Okay. Now, while you are focusing inward like this, all your 5 hindrances starts to appear a lot, come and disturb you. So you need to continuously focus and focus and focus until eventually the 5 hindrances get weakened and your concentration stronger. Right? Up to a point, your concentrations will overcome the 5 hindrances. So withdrawn from the unskillful mental qualities, accompanied by directed thought and sustained thought, vitakka and vichara. Rapture and pleasure born from withdrawal, seclusion. This is the most basic joy, the joy of withdrawal. No concentration yet, but this is the early stage where you are focusing on your object of meditation. Then, when your vitakka and vichara become so strong, it the mind started to focus and concentrated on that particular object of meditations, and it doesn't waver very much anymore. Then actually you don't need to put in as much effort into always bringing the attention back, because now your focus is strong already, right? So actually vitaka and vichara now subsides into the background, and what you have, you will feel more piti and sukha, and this is born of composure, born of concentration, because your concentration is growing. The mind become unified, as opposed to our everyday mind that jumps here, there, everywhere. It is actually a scattered mind. Now the scattered mind is being collected onto one single object, and now it's no longer scattered, it's unified, it's one-pointed. Okay, so that's the difference between our everyday scattered mind and a mind that is focused. The difference is like a torchlight and a laser. That's the difference. And there is unification of mind and internal confidence, internal assurance. Once you have reached this level, you are confident that your mind is calm and able to manage. As your sukha and your piti increase even more, the piti itself will start to fade, and what is now more obvious in your experience in the mind is the equanimity, the mindfulness, the alertness of the mind, and the sense of sukha within the body increase, become more prominent. This is when you go in. By this time, you will be in third jhana. Okay. Then abandoning pleasure and pain, meaning now actually you by the time you get into the fourth jhana, your awareness of the body is almost kosong already. That's why abandoning pleasure and pain is like, for some people they describe that they don't sense the body anymore. It's only mind. Okay, the mind is totally alert, perfect mindfulness, totally equanimous, perfect calmness, and totally one-pointed, perfect one-pointedness. That is the culminations of the fourth jhana. And it is at this level that the Buddha says your mind is ready to analyze and see things as they really are, because now your mind is very powerful. When a mind at this level looks at something, it sees straight away what it really is. Okay, anything that it wants to contemplate, it can contemplate very easily. So if at this level that you want to contemplate on the Dharma, on the true nature of realities, on what life is, on the three characteristics of anicca, dukkha, anatta. Now we ponder on this, and we conceptually can understand what is impermanent. We conceptually can understand what is suffering. We think we conceptually can understand what is anatta, but we don't really see it. We don't really know it. No seeing, no knowing, no knowledge, no vision. Okay, that's why the Buddha says when you have reached this level and you can actually see it and know it for yourself, that is when you have attained knowledge and vision of things as they really are. Because there's also the 5th, 6th, 7th and 8th jhanas, but I don't think it's necessary to go into this. So basically, when we talk about the jhanas, we only need to remember these 5 jhanic factors or mental factors. Vitaka, thought directed; vichara, thought sustained. Thought directed means you continuously bring your thought to the object of meditation. Thought sustained, you hold it there. If it runs away, you direct it back, you sustain it, hold it there. If it runs away, you direct it back, you hold it there. Until eventually your focus is so strong, your effort in doing this becomes less and less, because your concentration starts to build up the strength. Okay, and once you have gone beyond that, then you have the experience of joy, piti, and higher up you get the sukha, happiness, and in the 4th jhana it's totally one-pointed. So these are the 5 mental factors where you move higher and higher up. Okay. So when we compare worldly happiness and spiritual happiness, one is outward focus, the worldly happiness. Spiritual happiness is inward focus. In the worldly happiness, because it is outward focus, it is not within our control. Whereas for spiritual happiness, because we focus inwardly and we train ourselves, it is intrinsically there all the time. The only thing we need to do is to know how to access it, get into it. So with mastery, we can experience that happiness at will. However, the worldly happiness cannot, because it's ever changing. And in worldly happiness, it leads to more and more unwholesome mental states. Whereas in spiritual happiness, it leads to increased wholesome mental states. Worldly happiness is within Mara's influence. Spiritual happiness is safe from Mara's influence. Of course, the simple thing is that worldly happiness, you do not need to train your mind. No need bhavana, no need mental cultivation. Easier to achieve. Whereas for spiritual happiness, it requires a lot of mental cultivation, bhavana. You need right effort, you need right mindfulness, and eventually you need the right concentration as well. So it's a more tedious effort, but it is achievable. It is achievable. Okay. This is just an intermission. Freedom is realizing that you can't control life. Okay. Now in Cula-dukkhakhandha Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya number 14, the Buddha says, our ordinary daily mind, which is conditioned by greed, hatred and delusion, finds itself difficult to be free from temptations of sensuality. The mind that knows joy, piti and happiness, sukha, cannot be tempted thus. Because when you know joy and you know happiness, spiritual joy and spiritual happiness, you know that this sort of happiness is actually much more pleasant than the worldly happiness, and also much more desirable because it doesn't taint the mind. Now, what is happiness that is higher than spiritual happiness? The destructions of asavas leads to totally unbinding. Total unbinding means we are no longer bound to the world. We are no longer bound to the world. It requires the jhana as a stepping stone to insight and then to liberation. Okay. Now I want to point out here that spiritual happiness is not the exclusive teaching of the Buddha. In fact, even before the Buddha, there are other Hindu yogis. They have attained jhanas and they have had spiritual happiness experience before. Okay, and you also find that actually in Christianity, even in Islam. Some sect of Christianity and Islam actually emphasize a lot on meditation, but slightly different object of meditation for them, right? But any form of meditations that leads to one-pointedness of mind will give you this experience of spiritual happiness. Okay, so spiritual happiness by itself is not exclusively available only to Buddhists. Anybody can do that. But what is different in the Buddha's teaching is that he says even this spiritual happiness is not adequate. You can go higher. You can go to total liberation. How? Through the destructions of the asavas. How? Through insight. Insight here comes after you have attained your jhanas, after you have mastered your jhanas, so that you have the quality of mind and the strength of mind to analyze the reality of life. Okay. Now with insight, with the jhana, you get a very strong mind. And with that mind, you look at the true nature of reality, and then what you see is that in this entire universe of samsara, whether you are in kama loka, rupa loka or arupa loka, everywhere suffering still exists. Of course, the most physical suffering and mental suffering comes in our own human plane and the wufu planes. Okay, the heavenly planes in kama loka is pleasant, but still not as pleasant as the spiritual happiness that you found in rupa loka. Even higher than that is the arupa loka. But even at this level, the happiness is still not permanent. Okay, remember very early on the Buddha says that there are 3 types of dukkha. Dukkha, which is our daily kind of suffering, mental as well as physical suffering. Alright, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering, getting what you don't want is suffering, not getting what you want is suffering, being with someone you don't like is suffering, being away from someone you like is also suffering. So a lot of suffering state there. That is dukkha, worldly suffering. Then the Buddha says that there's another type of suffering, which is viparinama sukha, suffering that arises purely because things are impermanent, ever changing, and that is true all the way up to arupa loka. Okay, there's an even more subtle kind of suffering that arises from sankhara dukkha. All conditioned things are suffering because they are all dependent on each other and impermanent. So all throughout the universe, whether you are in kama loka or whether you're lucky enough to be reborn in rupa loka or all the way up to arupa loka, you can't escape from impermanence. So you can never have perfect or complete happiness or contentment. The only way is to get out of this samsara. And the only way to get out of this samsara is to break your bond to this samsara. And there are 10 bonds, the Buddha says, that bind us to this samsara, that keep us coming back over and over again. And these are the 10 fetters. Right? It's not necessary, and it's also not advisable for us to go into the 10 fetters tonight, because that is a big topic. But we know, don't we? We know that about these 10 fetters, and 5 lower fetters where we are attached to our identity. We think this body is me, right? We think this mind is me. Okay, when the body is painful, my body is painful. Okay, I am angry. Okay, we are not like someone who is an arahant and said anger arises. No, we say I am angry because we own the anger. This is my anger. My ankle, ankle is here. My ankle is painful. Okay, not this ankle is in pain or something like that. I don't know how the arahant experience it, but arahant has gone beyond the delusion of self. Say they don't own this body as theirs. They don't own the thoughts that comes as theirs, because they can even detach from their thoughts. Okay, but we can't. We view all our experience through the self, so we are very stuck with this self-identity. And in the past there are a lot of people, and I think even today there are a lot of people who think that doing certain rites and rituals can bring them to heaven, liberation, and all that. So this kind of belief is also a bond that keeps us locked here. And then the other thing is skeptical doubts about Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. No beliefs in the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha. So you find that there are a lot of beliefs in our mind that got us stuck in this samsara, coming back over and over again. Okay, apart from the fact that we have the habits of running after sensual pleasures or running away from things we don't like. It's sensual desire and ill will is basically attachment and aversion. Attachment to something we like is sensual desire. Some things we don't like is aversion. Running away from what we don't like is ill will. Okay, so we have a lot of this kind of beliefs and habits that keep us stuck in this. And then, even if we are able to overcome this. To be able to overcome this, the first lower three means you are already a stream winner, Sotapanna. Okay, if you can reduce number 4 and number 5, you are a Sakadagami. If you can completely eliminate 4 and 5, you are an Anagami. Anagami means you do not come back anymore into the human rebirth. You will be reborn in the pure abode, and from there you will be liberated, cool, completely. But to become an Arahant, you have to eliminate another 5 higher fetters, which means you don't even have the desire to be reborn in Rupa Loka, which is so blissful, or Arupa Loka. And then you have to eventually overcome your conceit, that little subtle attachment to the ego, to the self. You have to overcome all of it completely. And having overcome this delusion of self, then you have to destroy the asavas, the continuous uncontrolled mental outflow. Only then can you be said to be free from ignorance, to see everything as they really are. Ignorance from the Four Noble Truths. And that is total liberation. So how to attain spiritual happiness? The Buddha says his teaching is a very gradual path. Start by practicing virtues. When you practice virtues, you are free from remorse and guilt. And when you are free from remorse and guilt, there is gladness in your heart. With gladness in your heart and with mental cultivation, you attain joy. With joys, you get tranquility and further increase your joy to happiness. From there, your concentration maximized. So this is actually the description of the jhanas already, right? Once your concentration is perfect, then you start to see things as they really are, and you start to be dispassionate towards the world, the outer world. You find a sense of revulsion, in fact, of the outer world. Like the leper whose skin is all completely healed already. Now he doesn't see the outer world as pleasurable anymore. He has a revulsion, in fact, for it. And with that, he will start to destroy the asavas and get total liberation. So you see that actually you do need jhanas as stepping stones to insight and liberation. There's another sutta called the Ratta Vinita Sutta in Majjhima Nikaya number 24, called the relay chariots. It also describes the same steps here, except that in 7 steps rather than here in 10 steps. Okay, the 7 steps here in the relay chariots actually describe levels that were later used in the Visuddhimagga. First step is purification of sila. Second step is purification of mind. I think purification of mind means concentration. So first you perfect your sila, then you perfect your concentration. Then the next 5 steps is purifications of doubts, purification of seeing what is or is not the path, purification of the path and something like that. But the first one is perfection of sila, the second is perfection of samadhi, and the last 5 is the perfection of wisdom. Okay, you go and read up the Visuddhimagga, thick book. In summaries, this is the path to happiness. We start by our belief in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. Then when the belief is strong and we decide we put a determination to practice, we take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, the Triple Gem. When you take refuge in the Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha, that is when you are considered a Buddhist. When you uphold the 5 precepts, then you are considered a good Buddhist. Okay? And then, as a good Buddhist, you not only just uphold the 5 precepts, you are also encouraged to be charitable, kind, so you do a lot of danas. And most of the time when we do danas, our danas are based on giving danas to the monks, to the temples and all that, the requisites. But we should not forget that we can do dana in our day-to-day life through kind thoughts, kind words and kind actions. Okay? And then of course you perfect your silas through the 5 precepts. And for those who want to train more, deeper, this you are usually advised to the monks. But for lay people who want to train a little bit more, they can also follow this advice. Apart from the precepts, moderation in eating, restraint in senses, mindful and alert, devoted to wakefulness, contentment, seclusion of body and mind. As you go more and more, your seclusion away from the world becomes more and more serious. So you start to lose interest in worldly affairs, right? Then your mental development, bhavanas. In fact, a lot of Buddhists, lay Buddhists, as they do more and more practice and mental cultivations, they do have this sense of wanting to be less worldly and going more and more deeply into spirituality. And then sometimes they get stuck because on the one hand they have some worldly responsibility to fulfill, but on the other hand they have this deep desire to want to continue into a deeper practice in their spiritual development. So some people get stuck like that, and they ding dong in out somewhere in between. Okay, at some point you can decide later on if you want to commit more to your spiritual development, then you put a bit more time there, right? But the beautiful thing about Buddhism is that there is no one there to force you to do. It's entirely up to you, your standard, how much you want to achieve. Okay, so once you have do your mental development and attain your jhanas, then you can, according to the suttas, attain psychic powers as well as recollections of past life, seeing karma vipaka, how people died and then get reborn in certain places. And finally, the most important is the last one, the destructions of the asavas, because that's the one that liberates you from ever coming back to samsara. And I think I've said this before, and it's worth repeating. According to Ajahn Chah, if you practice a little, you gain a little happiness. Okay? If you practice a lot, you gain a lot of happiness. If you practice completely, you gain complete happiness. So now, in view of what we have discussed, we look at this advice and the message becomes a bit different now. If you practice a little, you gain a little happiness. That's worldly happiness. If you practice a lot, you gain a lot of happiness. That's spiritual happiness. If you practice completely and you gain complete happiness, that is liberation. Happiness that is higher than spiritual happiness. So, if by renouncing a lesser happiness, one may realize a greater happiness, let the wise man renounce the lesser, having regard for the greater. This is the Dhammapada. I don't know how the slide becomes like this. And I think that is the end already. Okay. Good timing. Any questions? Any questions?